I need to make a note here. He said that in an email, but I didn't realize he added his name. Bruce number 1 and Peter's number 2. Oh, and Vanessa's in there too. Okay, number 2. Bruce.
Yeah.
And his number 2.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Peter and Bruce are in agreement. And did we
Okay. So you're okay with the presentation? You go. Everything in there, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay. Okay. Great.
Yeah, just let me know if you need.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I'm live.
It's all right, we're all set now. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we'll probably after the presentation open up to you, and that's when the different person here on screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's the number? Peter. That's my person.
Good morning, everyone.
So we have like, this one was earlier. This one. So, okay. Well, I think we'll just go ahead and get started right on time. Since yesterday, it felt like our session went by quickly and then we wanted more time. So we'll use all of our time today. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome for the first time. For those of you who may not have been here yesterday, this is the Data Sharing Working Group. And today, this morning, we'll be continuing our discussion about Indigenous data sovereignty. And so yesterday we focused on capacity sharing, and Tosh gave a great summary in the plenary this morning. So I will just give a very brief version. We wanted to touch back on the recommendations because we wanted to give you the chance to reflect if anything seemed to be missing from the recommendations that we kind of brought out of the session yesterday. And then we'll move into today's session, which will be focusing on technical capacities. So yesterday we started off with a presentation from Riley Tai-Ting Fong from the Collaboratory for Indigenous Data Governance. We had a panel, Hannah Marie, Roberta, Kana and Camila, who shared from their experience and kind of reflected on how they have supported Indigenous data sovereignty, and also shared some points of friction or areas where it might have been challenging or difficult, and also thought about ways that advancing Indigenous data sovereignty, implementing Indigenous data sovereignty can support better relationships and better observing and better research in the Arctic. And then so out of our conversation, our working group coordinators got together and kind of pulled out 3 recommendations that we shared this morning. The recommendations were that Indigenous data sovereignty needs to be integrated and included in data management plans. And I think that there was some interest in maybe moving that forward in a concrete way and bringing some suggestions back to the funding agencies, and especially within The US government, I know there was some discussion about that. We also recommended that to document examples and practices of indigenous data sovereignty implementation to share with the Arctic research community. So I think that was a reflection of some of the really great examples that were shared yesterday. And hopefully we'll expect to hear more examples today of implementation. And just reflecting that there's many who are not here in the room who might like to learn about those examples, but also there's many more. So being able to kind of document and share those could be useful to the research community. And then the last recommendation from yesterday was to encourage Indigenous-led knowledge and capacity sharing across the Arctic so that the different governance contexts, so very different governance contexts and Indigenous governance, for example, between Northern Europe, Greenland, and North America. So encouraging some more discussion and dialogue could help sort of thinking about equity and thinking about how to kind of move Indigenous data sovereignty forward in all of those different environments and contexts. So those were the 3 recommendations. And then we also made some notes for some that seemed like they could come along more today, so that were more technically focused, so we can come back to those. But does anyone have any feedback about these before we move into the next session? Any comments or? Okay, it's still early. We're all still kind of arriving. So feel free to let us know if you have feedback. You can come in and talk to any of us. So now I am gonna introduce our panel today. So we have another panel of experts that we've invited to join us. Yeah, so if you can bring the Zoom up online, that would be great. So we have joining us online remotely, we have Bruce Robson from the Indigenous Sentinels Network. Hi, Bruce. Good morning. Can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you fine. Good morning, everyone.
Okay, great. And then Peter Pulsifer is also here from the Geomatics and Cartographic Research Center at Carleton University. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning. I can hear you well. Thanks.
An early morning for Peter. Thanks for being with us this morning. And then in the room, we have Sophie Crump from SICU. Sophie, would you be willing to come and sit? We sort of have 2 chairs at the front of the room for our in the room panelists. And then Vanessa Raymond is going to be on our panel this morning too. So welcome. And so today our focus is on technical capacities, and so everyone here is bringing sort of a different experience with the implementation of Indigenous data sovereignty and thinking about how to do this in a more technical way, thinking about interoperability, developing observing systems and observing platforms. And so we have some questions that we'll start out and kind of ask the panelists to respond to questions, and then we'll open it up for a conversation with everybody in the room. And then introductions. Yeah, that's yes. So we should start by introducing all of ourselves. And so I'm remiss in not introducing myself yet. My name is Nora Johnson. I'm a member of this coordinating group for the data sharing working group. I'm a research scientist at the National Snow and Ice Data Center. And one of the projects that I'm involved with is ELOCA, the Exchange for Local Observations and Knowledge of the Arctic. And I'll let Hannah Marie introduce herself.
Good morning, everyone. I know some of us are still getting coffee, and I know a lot of us are always jumping between sessions. So thank you guys for coming to ours. My name is Hannah Marie Garcia. I am also one of the co-leads on the data sharing working group. I am Sakai Lakota and mixed ancestry of European and Spanish. I'm not from the Arctic, but I am living and working in Anchorage, Alaska now. And I am currently the director of the Indigenous Sentinels Network, working for the Aleut community of St. Paul Island. And so ISN is an environmental monitoring network that's Indigenous led. So excited, I spoke yesterday, so I won't take up more space, and I'll pass it over to our panelists. We'll start here in the room and then we'll move to online.
Hi, I'm Sophie Crump. I work for the Arctic Eider Society, which is an Inuit-led nonprofit based in Senekiluaq and Nunavut, although I myself am based in Ottawa in southern Canada. At the Arctic Eider Society, I work primarily on our SICU platform, which is mobile app and web platform that is designed to support Indigenous hunters to record their observations on the land and share their knowledge primarily with other community members. And I offer training and workshops and ongoing sort of engagement and support for the projects that are run using SICU as well.
Hello, Palava. I'm Layasi, Vanessa Raymond. Call me Vanessa. I am the Senior Program Manager of Abundant Intelligences, which is a program exploring how Indigenous knowledges and systems can expand AI. It's based out of Concordia University, but many of you know me from my Fairbanks days, so I was based in Fairbanks for about 10 years working in and around Arctic data. I just recently joined the Arctic Data Committee as a co-chair, along with Chantal, who's here, so that's exciting. I sit on the US AON member committee, expert committee of members, and then also the Interagency for Arctic Research Policy Commission, IARPC data management team, along with some other people who are here. Honored to be here. Thanks.
Peter?
Peter, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. I'm calling in from the unceded territories of the Anishinaabe people, now known as Ottawa, Canada, and I'm a researcher at Carleton University. Since 2006 or so, I've been working with communities in the Arctic primarily, but also elsewhere, Inuit communities mostly, in the area of data sharing, mapping, and working with the communities to make their knowledge, documented forms of their knowledge, available in culturally appropriate and ethical ways, and also making sure that they have the data that they need to achieve their goals. Lately, I'm spending more time working with post-secondary students to try and make them more aware of these issues and topics, and I'm looking forward to engaging in the panel. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Peter. And Bruce?
Hi, everybody. I'm Bruce Robson. I'm the technical director of the Indigenous Sentinels Network, which Hannah Marie has already introduced. I've been working with the LA community of St. Paul Island in one way or another since 1989, when I first arrived there as a fisheries observer, then worked for 15 years as a marine mammal researcher for NOAA, but focusing a lot on working in the community on their subsistence harvests and doing entanglement research with the community. And then started to work in 2004 for the tribe directly when I moved to Spain for family reasons. And so I've been basically working on the Indigenous Sentinels Network through its iterations over the years since it was created. And I guess that gives me, it's both an honor to have been integrated with the community for as long as I have, and have people I worked with when they were young teens grow up to be my boss and, direct the research that we're doing. So it's been an honor to be involved over these years. And I am honored also to be here with a bunch of great network of people who are doing important work throughout the Arctic. And I look forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
Great, well, thanks for all those introductions. So we have some questions that we shared ahead of time, and we mentioned to all the panelists that you don't feel that you need to answer all the questions. So I think we'll start with a question about data sharing platforms, because in one way or another, all of our panelists have been involved in the development of platforms. And so the question is, how can platforms that host and share Indigenous data support Indigenous data sovereignty? And what are some of the barriers or challenges from a technical perspective that you can share, and how can they be addressed? So who would like to respond first to this question? Anyone in the room ready to start?
It is a big question.
Is this on?
It's on. And you online, can you hear Vanessa and Sophie? Yes, right? I think our systems are working.
Oh, yeah, it's suggesting.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as they're speaking up. Works fine.
Okay, that's great.
I mean, for me, I think a lot about the challenges I have yet to see, and I haven't looked at the ISM or the SICU back end, so I'm not speaking about programs that are represented here. But I have yet to see a data sharing platform, as you described, that is capable of presenting Indigenous knowledge in a good way. Let's just shorthand it to that. Most software platforms do not categorize or group the data in, I would consider, culturally relevant ways. They do not present it in culturally relevant methods. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done around specifically categorization of information. And I think there's a lot of talk at AOS, last day and a half about benefit and social impact. And I think that's another way to frame the information and to group the information. So that's my thoughts.
Great.
Yeah, I can maybe speak from like the perspective of SIKU. I think there are a couple of things that we've done to try and really make sure that like Indigenous data sovereignty is at the center of how SIKU operates. And that's both sort of in the technical capacity and then also like what you're talking about in terms of like how data is presented. So one is that like a key component of SIKU is that every individual user owns their data. And even if you're on the platform and you can see other people's posts, what they're sharing, that doesn't give you the permission to use it. You have to be given direct permission through a project stewardship framework in order to be able to use that data for a given purpose. So that means that every individual hunter, land user can record what they're seeing and share it and use it for their own purposes, share knowledge with their communities. But then if the community wants to engage in a monitoring project or a researcher wants to access that data to support research, then they are can be given like basically a non-exclusive license to access that data through the back end and through sort of a specific sharing framework. But even before that, like before you get onto SIKU, everyone has to create an account. You have to say really who you are. You have to agree to the key terms, which include like intellectual property and respect for Indigenous knowledge. And I just wanted to share one thought about the categorization of Indigenous knowledge. One framework that we've also adopted on SIKU is to use Indigenous environmental terminology and language and dialects. So a really strong example of that is for ice posts that on SIKU, when a user makes a post about ice conditions, if they're sharing about dangerous ice conditions or forming or melting ice, they have the ability to tag it with Inuktitut ice terminology, which is much more specific than English terminology, much more accurate. And then you can also, that allows for a bit of categorization by different ice type according to an Indigenous knowledge framework.
Great. Peter, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Sure, yeah, and I think if I'm just thinking about Indigenous data sovereignty, primarily thinking about the ability to control some of the things that we've done. We're in a bit of a different context. We don't have a single platform, but a framework. In creating the technical framework in a way that it can be fully customizable, so that you're not superimposing any requirements for the categorizations or for how the data are represented, symbolized, things like that. So I think that's a key to any platform is giving that control to the users, to the creators of the system. And then using the technology to allow for that control as well. So as Sophie talked about, giving roles so that people can identify themselves, but also control how their data and information are being used and so on. We're seeing some good possibilities, I think, with things like knowledge labels as well. So local context, things like that, which are still at the early stages, but I think have a lot of promise. And I guess the last thing I'll say is just using different forms of representation. So I don't think you can truly have sovereignty if you're forcing the users or the knowledge contributors to put their knowledge into boxes or into certain table structures or formats. So using things like multimedia, different ways of actually being able to engage with the system. So there's not just that kind of usually Western influenced model for storing and representing data.
can I just add a few things from the ISN side? I think it sounds like we're all doing very similar things in terms of, giving control to the user. Some of the approach, we've taken a very granular approach to data sharing, which gives community and organizational admins the ability to invite in different users that they want to share, isolate them to only viewing data from one data collection program. So similar things. We're also very interested in local context and labeling. I know a bunch of us have been, having conversations about trying to employ that technology. We've also, I think I really appreciate what Peter just said about giving the users control in how they want to collect data. And one of the things we've done there is implement a custom form builder so that the communities and organizations we're working with are actually able to build their own data structures and collect data in a format that's relevant to them, including the ability to use multimedia again. So recording audio, videos, being able to enter text or enter data in a variety of ways. So I think, this is probably going to be a common theme throughout the session, that we're all working on a lot of very similar approaches that are enabled by the levels of technology we have access to. And that to me is exciting. And, the fact that we're all here working together and talking about it and can use those technical capacities to our advantage and to the advantage of our communities and Indigenous users that are out there collecting the data. So the more we can let that drive how we operate and construct our platforms and, or frameworks, as Peter said, I think is the benefit of us all being together and talking about that, and how we can enable the users to basically define their own data collection and data sovereignty frameworks, but with a unified approach as much as we can. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great, thank you. It looks like I actually don't have Zoom in front of me. It looks like there may be a follow-up question in the chat, or is that just for later to follow?
For later. Yeah.
Okay, so we have some additional thoughts on this, but we'll come back to them. Bruce, I appreciate that reflection that we're hearing some, similar thoughts and themes, and that maybe that reflects in some ways, I think, both an ongoing discussion in this small community over years, but also the evolution of technologies and the capacities that we now have access to. So the next question that we have for the panel is to reflect a little bit on how international collaboration and standards contribute to the global implementation of Indigenous data sovereignty. So I think, a theme from all of the series of over many years, these meetings, is this question of, how can we work together in this global context, in a pan-Arctic context, to move forward a shared agenda on observing. And so if you have thoughts or ideas about, how that applies to Indigenous data sovereignty, we would be really interested to hear about that. Is anyone interested in sharing first? And again, if you don't want to speak to any of the questions, that's also totally fine. It looks like Vanessa can respond, and then we'll go to Zoom.
I think, the fact that we're all nodding our heads when we hear the word Indigenous data sovereignty is an example of international collaboration of Indigenous people working together to surface these ideas through whatever channels and means that they have. And I think reverting back to those original and consistent networks of sharing and talking about information and talking about rights and talking about needs is something that we should lean into as much and as often as we can. I think the Arctic Council and the permanent participant engagement has been a really strong place where Arctic Indigenous people have been able to lead conversations. And I think, Indigenous people have always shared knowledge with each other through protocol and process, and some of that's been lost. And so finding ways for Indigenous people to reconnect in ways that are like protocol bound, but still sharing across communities and cultures and languages is an important thing for us to be working on and supporting through our work in Arctic research.
Thank you, Vanessa. And I think that goes back to one of the recommendations that came out of yesterday, which was just to encourage more opportunities for that direct sharing. So that's great. Any thoughts, Bruce or Peter? Do you have thoughts on this question?
Yeah, lots. You want to go first, Peter?
No, you go ahead, Bruce. We can alternate.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, I think I kind of want to the idea of interconnectedness and interoperability. I think, yes, we should all work together on standards and kind of the common denominators of how we're operating, because we're dealing with very similar issues and similar data that we want, or the communities want collected, or research agencies that are working with communities. But I think we're in a place now where we can, use our technical, opportunities that we have now to promote that interconnectedness. For example, I think there should be, or I would love to see all of us working together more on sharing data amongst platforms and across platforms, because, we are working, we're stronger together. We have a lot to do. There's so much that the communities we're working with both need to do and that we can do now. And the ability to share across platforms through creating application programming interfaces or APIs that can connect our platforms, that, we may have data sets that we want to combine, or, for example, long-term data on ice around the Pribilof Islands. We've been collecting that for 20 years. A lot of that stuff should be available to Aloka and shared, or, so I think we have an opportunity with the evolution of the technologies we have at our fingertips to connect ourselves more and work together. And, that I know there have been conversations going on, at the meetings, about this very thing. And I look forward to the opportunity now that we're all, getting to know each other a lot better, and what each of us are doing and what cool work we're doing, to try and connect it up, use the technology to our advantage, and move forward together. Peter, over to you.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think there's part of the question is around standards and interoperability. And one thing I often point out is, standards, there's a whole continuum of standards, ranging from just, informal agreements between and among groups, right through to international, data standards, through to things like international treaties. So one thing I found useful over the years is to understand, coming into these efforts to interoperate and to collaborate, is understand what level are you trying to standardize. Each has its value, but having been involved in groups like ISO for international standards, they can be really complex, long processes, sometimes taking a decade. Is that necessary for your group? If it is, great. If not, there's a lot that can happen just getting groups like this together. And then to Bruce's point, I think what we're finding is that middle ground is, how do we standardize enough and then use the technology to do things like transformation and so on. So not try and get it perfect and have everybody doing exactly the same thing or collecting in exactly the same way, but using that technology and transformation to be able to share across those differences. And I think that, to me, is really important, because, the big problems we're facing now are global, and we have to do it as a community, and we have to do it quickly in many cases. So we don't always have that luxury of having a decade or 2 decades to figure out how to do everything. So I think we have lots of opportunities here, and I've spent a lot of my time in the international community, so I certainly see great value in collaborating internationally.
Well, thank you for those responses. And I guess I just want to ask if you can maybe talk a little bit more about interoperability, because I know we've been talking about this for a while, and this is sort of something, it's like the elusive horizon of interoperability. And there are some very specific challenges around Indigenous data and, protection of some aspects of the data as, you know, the Indigenous nations or individuals might want some subsets of data protected. And so I know, you know, I'm familiar with some of the ways that the different platforms that are here have tackled that, but none of us have gotten to interoperability yet. Although Peter, it sounds like maybe you are moving forward in some ways. So I'm curious if you can share a little more, maybe just about, you know, how you see that moving forward. How do we overcome, you know, what have the obstacles been to developing interoperability, and then how do we overcome them?
Can I jump in, or is there?
Yeah, great, please.
Okay, sure. I think first, when we think about interoperability, like the standards, it's nuanced. So there's multiple levels, and there's the technical interoperability, things like, can you read the format I'm providing you? And if you're old enough, you remember a time when a Mac couldn't talk to a PC. You'd have to sort of convert data so you could share between. Now, all of that stuff, I think, is resolved now in terms of that level of interoperability. And the bigger challenges that remain are what we call, and we'll come back to this, I think, in question 4, semantic interoperability. So great, I can share my data with your system, but are we talking about the same things? When we label something in this way, is it the same as your label, and so on? So that's where I think that's less of a technical issue from a writing code and all of that. It's more of the human issues of communication and language and all of that. So a lot of the work we're doing now on our projects really look at that, and there are technical ways, I won't go into the details right now, but that you can store that kind of information and then use the technologies to try and translate and so on, as best you can, recognizing there's always a loss.
Great. Yeah. And Sophie, thank you, Peter.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe comment on the dynamics of like navigating Indigenous data sovereignty and interoperability, because I think it's true that I think for like ISN and for SIKU, like we're now at a stage of stability as platforms that we can really start thinking about interoperability and like making sure that we're not reduplicating the same efforts, that we're actually just strengthening each other's efforts. But at the same time, like critical to like SIKU is that every individual user can decide what happens with their data and who's able to see it and how it can be shared. And so it raises, I think, a number of questions that now that we're at a stage of like being able to think about it, we get to grapple with these questions, which is really great. But like, how do we uphold those principles that we're committed to, while also giving the opportunity for this knowledge to be shared more broadly or to have influence on like international level conversations? And for the wealth that this knowledge holds to be taken into consideration at that scale. Yeah, so new questions, but I think they're exciting ones to grapple with.
Great.
Yeah, I think interoperability and Indigenous data sovereignty is a great topic. We'll also be talking about it tomorrow, so if you love this. And I think you mentioned a license, right? Or a data sharing agreement, an agreement to use the platform. And I think we're seeing a lot of innovation by Indigenous organizations in the space of data licensing. And I think all of the platforms here have pushed forward, you know, actually you need this type of agreement. Actually, we need to talk about this type of consent. And so I think that's another space where Arctic Indigenous platforms are innovating in the space of data.
Vanessa, I know there was a statement, a short statement that you were involved with developing that spoke to licensing. And I'm wondering if you could briefly kind of share that example, because I think it's a really good example and we want to bring some of those examples into this space.
Yeah, so my former job, I was the data governance lead of the Alaska Center for Energy and Power, which is out of UAF, University of Alaska Fairbanks. And so we're working with energy data, which often isn't considered observational or Arctic observational data, although I would consider it certainly a part of that. And in order to do a lot of energy modeling to figure out things like how can we lower the cost of energy in Alaska and the North, we need to map energy infrastructure because there aren't those maps. And do community members want you flying drones over their houses or their fish camps? And so we mapped with community partners, Galena and Kotzebue, their energy infrastructure. And we partnered with a startup called Cartorium. So we had sort of industry, we had academia, we had community partners, we had the energy utilities, all interested in this mutually beneficial data set. And by writing our licensing in the proper way, we were able to share that data with everyone. And also funders love this, right? Because you pay once and you get, 10 products almost immediately. So to me, the most exciting output of this was that I think a Galena hadn't been mapped and licensed properly since 2009. It had actually been mapped in 2014, but the license was prohibitive so that the community could not actually receive the map that was done of Galena. So what we did was not only deliver the files to them, we still steward them for them because they don't actually want to hold it. They don't actually want that responsibility, but they want access to it. So that's part of the agreement. And then also we printed out like a giant map and sent it to the power station. That the power station engineers were like, look, this map is from like 1977 and like it doesn't reflect, where the poles are or where our transformers are. So to me, that was a big win. Anyways, that's it.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Okay, great. So our next question, we're going to move ahead to question 4. And so this question is it possible to establish pathways between knowledge domains or ways of knowing, for example, Indigenous knowledge and scientific monitoring in knowledge sharing platforms? And if so, what is necessary and how can this be approached? So sort of started to think about this, in the last question, and Peter mentioned semantic interoperability. So maybe Peter, if you'd be willing to start us off and kind of pick up with a little bit more about that, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Noor. I think our partners are really focusing on this a lot in many of the projects that we're involved in. In particular, there are a couple where this is really relevant, and that's working with genomics experts who are really sort of trying to understand how genomics can be used for things like wildlife. I won't call it management, but working with communities on wildlife, food security, and all those types of things. And then trying to link that to the concerns of communities, but also the language being used and so on. So in that project, or there's actually 2 related projects, the major thing that we're doing is focusing on bringing people together first to actually have those discussions around what are people's interests, what are people's knowledge bases, where are they coming from, what kind of terminology are they using, et cetera, to get that common ground through dialogue, through meeting, and so on, before we start thinking about how might it be appropriate or relevant to do this in an information system. In those cases, we are starting down the road though of documenting the terminology, documenting the concepts in the technology, and that's called an ontology is the technical name for it. But in those ontologies, we're trying to look at the potential common ground. So this idea of crosswalking, or being able to say, okay, when you're talking about this, it means this to me, and this is how we might actually share interest in it. So we're putting that into a model that is being co-created or co-developed, and then having the technology build on that. So when you're in the system, you're not having to just defer and say, well, this is going to be a system all about the expert genomics knowledge, nor is it strictly going to be a community, but where's the common ground? So that's showing some early signs of success, I'll call it, where it's helping, and not just the technology, but the process of bringing people together to talk has really been valuable in doing that. So down the road, we're looking at being able to use that as a basis for, I think, systems that are much more respectful of all the different knowledge systems, and able to help cross those not necessarily boundaries, but just bringing people together in more meaningful ways.
Great. Thanks for sharing that example. I think that was really helpful and helped me have a more concrete sense of how you might approach that. Bruce, do you have anything you want to add to this question?
Yeah, that's all very exciting work. To me, it comes back, I mean, establishing those pathways comes back to relationship building, which is a theme that keeps coming up. And I think, finding those common denominators, whether it's, a little bit going back to the last question, if we're all working towards implementing local context labeling, we have to, if we're going to use the same labels, we have to agree on the text underneath. And those labels are going to go with the data, or the concepts we're defining underneath about data sovereignty. But then, I mean, we've approached, from the beginning, we've kind of been working with how do we merge Indigenous knowledge and scientific monitoring on the Pribilofs. And that kind of started out with having people on the islands who live there and, knew where to go to make observations and, know the habits of the wildlife, making the observations, but we were doing it to provide data for co-management or to inform, NOAA marine mammal monitoring programs. But over the years, we're trying to evolve more towards from the community's end and trying to merge those with what we want to provide with our scientific collaborators. So it's really been working together over the years to the point where, we have a very close collaboration with the Marine Mammal Laboratory at NOAA and, their program managers. And they're now coming up with ideas for why fur seals are declining on St. Paul Island or stabilizing on St. George Island. The two islands are very close, and looking at things like the time of arrival and, when fur seal females are giving birth to their pups. And those insights are coming not only from the data collected over a fairly lengthy time series now by the community sentinels, but also the insights that they're giving to the researchers about what may be important and what differences there are between the two islands. So it's fascinating to watch. I think it's been building those relationships over the years and working closely with agencies as well as paying attention to the community who has insights because they're there. I mean, I realized that very quickly when I started doing marine mammal research there that, hey, I want to collect this data and I'm not there in November, or December. And we're starting to see more animals stay on the island, things like that, because the community is telling us. So it's really building the relationships and, not only sharing data, but sharing concepts and ideas about why things we're observing in changing environments are happening. So it's an exciting time. I think it's very rich with opportunity right now, the more we all work together.
Great. Do either of you want to add on?
Yeah, I wanted to share maybe a really specific example, because I think I think it's sort of central to how SIKU was established, bringing like scientific Western science methods and research tools into conversation with Indigenous knowledge. And part of that was around dam development in Quebec and the impacts on the waterways in the East Hudson Bay. And so we have the community members in the community-driven research network of Eastern Hudson Bay were taking CTD casts to measure salinity in the water. But this was also related to hunting seals and noticing that the seals were sinking to a certain point. And because the fresh water was on top and then the salt water was below at a time of year when that normally wasn't the case. And so I think this, you can have both methods or both systems observing different things that say something about the same phenomena. I think it's through those conversations, through relationships that you're able to sort of make those connections. But that means that now on SIKU, for example, when you hunt a seal, you can indicate, did it sink? And then that said something about the salinity in the water where it was caught. But then you can also, if you want, take a CTD cast and record those measurements as well and have both sets of knowledge and information to help like assess what's happening.
That's a great example. Yeah, thanks for bringing concrete. I think the more concrete examples we have, the better we can sort of all understand, and it really grounds it. I think it grounds the conversation. So thank you. So we had one more question that we had asked ahead of time, but I think we'll just hold off and maybe open up for some discussion questions and conversation with everyone in the room, and then we can come back to this other question if there's time. But I want to make sure we have plenty of time today for more shared discussion. So I'm going to hand it over. Hannah Maria is going to
Help
facilitate,
some of
yep.
the group discussion. And I also want to emphasize, we've got a pretty decent group in the Zoom, so I'm going to start with opening that up. We had a comment, Shannon mentioned that she wonders if licenses and permits issued by organizations in Arctic Canada, like examples, Yukon Tourism and Culture, to conduct research could be used as a base for development of data permitting. She's like, it's not really a question, but a thought around how licensing and permits issued by organizations in Arctic Canada could be used to start develop data permitting. So I didn't know if the panels had direct thoughts, but she wanted to share that thought, and I wanted to elevate it in the space. And if not,
Yeah, maybe just that's, I think, like a foundational level for licensing, like at least on SIKU, like if someone's running some kind of research or monitoring project, they have to show us ahead of time that they have the right permits in place, that the right licenses are already secured. This doesn't substitute for any of those other kinds of agreements that are required, and in some cases are determined by like yeah, the Indigenous governments of the area as well. So
any other thoughts from the panel? No? Thank you, Sophie, because I think that gets into also what we've elevated in past recommendations around like understanding the different structures of permitting and governance across the Arctic. That could be helpful as we think about protocols.
So yeah, before we open to questions, let's just have an appreciation for what our panelists have shared already. So thank you, panel.
And I know we've got some questions we can start discussion with, but does anyone have a question from the room or a comment even right off the bat?
I have two questions, but I'll start with one. And this is specifically to the kind of the databases, which is something I'm working on. Oh, and I'm Alex Rebello. I'm at University of Alaska Fairbanks, working with the Alaska Arctic Observatory and Knowledge Hub. So my first question is, what are some mechanisms that you've used to measure traffic on your database, such as who is accessing the database and why? Why are they interested in your observations? Yeah, if you've had an established mechanism for that already, or if you're thinking about it, or if you have hopes and dreams for that.
I'm going to open it up to the folks in the room if you want to respond, and then we'll pass it over.
sure. On SIKU, we have a couple different types of metrics. We have from our like back end, we can see like post creation and account creation, then that kind of thing. And then that gives us a way of assessing like, okay, how many people are creating accounts on SIKU and actually contributing to the platform versus like how many are creating accounts and just kind of checking it out. Or we also offer a number of services on SIKU like maps and weather services and this kind of thing. So we also have metrics to assess who's accessing the maps and how much and from where. And so we're actually able to see like there are very few people posting in Greenland, but lots of people accessing satellite maps in Greenland. So we understand that the reason they're using SIKU is for that. In terms of like active, yeah, we don't have like a quick summary of like who's clicking what buttons in terms of like reviewing posts and that kind of thing. But I think it's one of the metrics that we're like working on introducing, and we have, I think, some web updates that are just being implemented that will help us do that.
Do you have another question?
I think I recorded Bruce.
Bruce, maybe, I know we've been thinking about this a little bit in terms of tracking of who's accessing the database. If you need to repeat the question, I can hand the mic back to Vanessa, but if you want to respond. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Did you hear the question, Bruce?
Okay, I'm sorry, I wasn't sure if that was to me.
I was standing away from the mic. I forgot my own rule.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're in an interesting position in that way with ISN. We're just about to onboard users onto a new platform. We have a whole lot more functionality in terms of tracking use. And I was having a conversation in a development call this morning about, how if we use a program called Hotjar, which the purpose would be to track errors that users are having on the system. But my point in this discussion this morning was, how do we make sure that that's not collecting information that users don't want to have tracked, just for something as simple as bug reporting. And so, there is the ability to not record data on, user personal information. And, so we're having to deal with those kinds of things in, implementing new technology. But ISN is more of an invited platform in terms of what Sophie's talking about with SIKU. It's more open sign up. So within ISN, by virtue of being invited to a community and a data collection program, we're tracking that, automatically just within the structure, but then also tracking who is given access to data. So within a created data collection program, you can invite in other users and invite them to the platform. And that could be an agency researcher who's helping with quality assurance or something on a data collection program, and also track what data is either shown to different users, given access to a data report, or when the data goes out of the system and is shared, that's all, completely tracked and recorded. So, we're kind of learning how to use the new technologies we have to track usage in that kind of way. Then we also have an open platform, the Skipper Science program, where you can just log in and sign up for an account and log observations. This is targeted more at fisheries and fishermen, but there's considerable overlap within Alaska in communities who's fishing. They may be using ISN for observations on land or coastally, but then they go out fishing and are recording things for Skipper Science. So I guess the main point is we're learning, with the opportunity we have to both create open data programs and then also have invitation only, and what tools are most useful within either paradigm. I don't know if that actually answered the question, but
We could probably talk a lot about.
oh yeah.
Thank you, Bruce. We have a question in the chat that I'll read for the folks in the room. Could one foresee publishing of aggregated data sets on, for example, sea ice conditions, be integrated in could be more integrated into open data repositories frameworks than be specified plan? Oystein, could we bring Oystein up and have him explain this question? Sorry.
Yeah, I might need to.
Yeah, I could. If we could bring Oystein up, one of the perspectives, or at least allow them to speak, is he able to speak?
Is his camera?
Yes, his camera. Oh, your mic is not coming through well, Oystein, though.
Oystein, we had the usual problem with the Mickey Mouse.
Can you show the chat on to the room?
Yeah. Oh no, that is a.
Oh, you still.
We all needed a laugh.
You are distorted.
Okay. Let me see. I can also.
Still distorted, Oystein.
Is it better now?
Distorted. Yes, you're better now.
Okay.
I'm fine.
Now we can hear.
You got it. You're clear now.
Sorry for that. Just to wake you up a bit. The question is more because you have a lot of data in these systems. It was mentioned earlier, an example from sea ice. And being a remote sensing scientist working with WMO in the WMO Global Cryosphere Watch, actually, I'm interested in this concept of bringing information from the two knowledge domains together. In particular, for example, for validation of remote sensing products or numerical modeling efforts in order to, forecast the sea ice conditions. And that would mean that you would need some sort of an aggregated product being generated in the platforms that you are discussing here that could be suitable for validation purposes, etc. Bruce mentioned earlier, of course, there is a need for a dialogue on what is needed on both sides. But would it be possible, or are there hinderings of actually publishing a data set like that? Because I haven't seen it so far. It's about the specific platforms which serves a specific purpose, and then you have the sort of remote sensing community on the other side, and there's not much dialogue in between. So how do we navigate that sort of gap in between? That's my question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Explained it better than I could.
If I can jump in on that one, I think in some ways it's fairly simple. I mean, one approach we've taken with our new platform is when you're creating a data output report, you can pick any field that you want to output. So, you know, if our sentinels we've for many years, really from the beginning, we've always collected a standard set of weather and environmental conditions data with each observation. And you may be looking at marine mammals or seabirds, but you collect that weather data. So there's a long time series there. And then there's specific focused observations on sea ice. But those data will all be imported into the new platform. And in addition to, you know, what's will be coming in, that can all be aggregated. And only certain fields within that data set can contribute to an output report. And then, so, you know, getting it out of the system in a consistent format that's agreed upon and useful to you in validating sea ice, you know, satellite observations, that's fairly straightforward. But we've also talked, you know, in our development process about the idea of also having a data warehouse where data sets that are open and designated as such and agreed to, you know, from the level of the user, you know, as Sophie's saying, the user should have control over their data and, you know, agree to where it's going. But getting that agreement for things like sea ice observations, I think, you know, as long as personal information, name, and, you know, maybe location, if there's a reason, if they're fishing, they don't want that location to be precise, but that can be aggregated into a grid. You know, we've got technical means to do that kind of thing to make it acceptable for that data to be, you know, to go from the care principles to the FAIR principles, you know, to be open data. And I think maybe working together on the idea of data warehousing, where we can provide those data sets that have been agreed to be open data, and, you know, they'll be available for uses like that. So I think there's both, you know, platform specific component to this where we have to decide how data is output and do we meet data sovereignty standards, but then also, you know, a collaborative effort for how that data can be made available as open data after those protections are met.
Thank you, Bruce. Peter, would you like to make a comment, or Vanessa first and then Peter? Yeah, sorry, I saw two hands go up. Vanessa, go ahead.
I've been trying to make the term data fish camp a thing for a very long time. So Bruce, I'm going to propose that to you.
Data fish.
Which to me is like a no frills warehouse where you get just what you need and nothing more to feed the family. I also think what you're talking about aligns with concepts of data trusts, which I think would really benefit Arctic observing and Arctic data, in which there is a trusted third party that will steward and hold and maintain all the licensing and permissions and consent on behalf of people who've put the data there. And I think that that's a big need circumpolar wide. So I think there's a lot of great thinking that you guys are exploring for ISN. And then also we were, Oysteins was thinking about aggregation. I was also thinking about aggregation in the concept of a hot jar. I mean, all of the analytics tracking firms are like super invasive. So I appreciate your hesitation, but I think with hot jar, you can actually aggregate all the clicks basically on your site and your database. So you only see patterns of behavior as opposed to individual behavior.
I think Peter might have been next.
Yeah, Peter, and then we'll go to Sophie.
Sure. Thanks very much. A really good question, Oystein. And I think it comes back to this conversation we're having about, how are we going to do that aggregation in terms of the data coming from different monitoring systems and the terminology used and the measurements used and all of that. So I think that would be really important because the scale of interest for WMO and GCW and my familiarity with it is usually at a sort of a regional scale or national and international. So that implies that you're not going to get observations from one single system. And when you're doing things like classification and remote sensing, you need to be very aware of exactly, the terms used and how it's collected and so on. So I do think that implies that sort of collaboration we were talking about earlier, of people getting together and making it at least clear on when they're publishing their data, what they're publishing very specifically, so that kind of aggregated data set could be put together. And again, obviously we have to respect permissions and so on as we do that. So I think that's a great way to take advantage of initiatives like this to bring groups together.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, I guess, a specific use case. Like on SIKU from the beginning, we've had a couple of key like options that people can opt in or out of. One of which is to contribute to open access data. One of which is to contribute to Indigenous Indigenous self-determination, like so contributing to community held or regionally held like data governance. And the third is a newer one we introduced, which we call Ice Watch Stewardship, because we run an ice monitoring challenge every spring, and it's ongoing right now. So you can go on SIKU and see what people are sharing about ice safety right now. But part of the idea of that is that because we also serve maps on SIKU, we're bringing together the data, or the long-term vision is to use the data from those Ice Watch Steward enabled posts to help with machine learning training for producing a better quality ice map, basically, that can better recognize like glinias and cracks and things like that that are relevant for on ice travel. But that's a very small scale compared to like publishing aggregated data sets for like a larger international scale work. But I think we've tried to at least be ready for those conversations with some of these stewardship settings, but I think have to have more conversations about like what does it actually look like for those to be implemented beyond like the specific context of our platform.
Sorry, maybe look at something. And also to go back to, well, I guess all the comments. One of the challenges that I faced in aggregating data, that's sensitive data, to something that can be publicly accessible, even if you have all the consent, you still need a team that can do it, and that team has to be incredibly trusted, and that team is often very hard to find. So I think that's a gap that we have across, I would just say, circumpolar Arctic and maybe the world, is how do we train and I don't want to say certify, but acknowledge that this is a trusted team that can take very sensitive data and make it less sensitive, and what's the training for that?
Awesome, thank you, Vanessa. And we've got some questions in the room. And so I think, just also one last comment from Oystein too, that I think we can also think about some sort of framework for this extraction of data that we've all just been discussing. So that's a good thing to think about and just hold as we go to some questions in the room. But thank you for that comment too, Oystein. Question? Sean? Yes.
Hello there, Test. Thanks, panel, for your thoughts. My name is Sean Tippett from Ocean Networks Canada. I work in research data management, and I'm going to pose potentially two questions. One focuses more on the semantics of interoperability. The second one is a little more focused on, well, I'll get to that one in a bit. Let's start with the first one. So my organization's interested in using local contexts, and we see the potential in it, but we also see potential issues around licensing and potential conflicts between what a community wants to describe in their local contexts and then maybe something else is said in the open data license policy or something like that. So I guess my question is, how does one navigate that, and do you work with the community to discern what these labelings should be at the point of a potential data agreement? And then like also my concern is also if the community has free access to change that at any point, what's stopping them from changing it post agreement?
Did anyone feel comfortable to respond? I know Bruce and Peter, you both mentioned local context, so maybe one of you has some experience you can draw on to respond to Sean.
And if we need to repeat.
I might just say, we're in the same process of looking at how, if and how the local context would be implemented. And I think you just raised the core questions and issues, is how do you go about ensuring that the appropriate labels are used? And how do you ensure, even at a community level, that that's broadly supported? Because you're not always talking about just specific knowledge that's specific to one individual, but it's community based. So that's one of the discussions that we're having. I don't know that there's a problem with or a solution to the idea of if the certain label is assigned and then that's changed later. And that even goes beyond now thinking about the Indigenous data context into broader society. So we're now seeing legislation and so on about our own personal information, and being able to say, in this context or this time frame, I make it openly available, but a year from now, I may change that, and I may change the label or change how I want to make that available. So I think that's something we probably just need to recognize is going to be the case. It does provide challenges if you're thinking about using the data, for example, for peer review publication or something, and you base certain results on it, and that access to that data changes later. But I think as a community, we have to work through those things, because the other option would just simply to say, once you assign this forevermore, that's what you've assigned, and I don't think that's appropriate.
Yes, and it gets into issues like, okay, if I think it's both governance and how a network like we call ourselves would there's going to be differences between actual user communities within the network, and how do we incorporate that if one group wants a change and another is not sure, how do we handle those issues? But then to Peter's final technical comment, if there are changes, do we go back in time, and is the label changed in older data, or does it is it only going forward from a certain point? And I think if we're all talking about using local context, these are the things that we have to hammer out, and we've been having conversations with Ocean Data, and they're complicated questions, but just a little insight into we're working on a lot of updating and revising a lot of our data access policies and user agreements right now, and it's complicated and it takes time, and the extent to which we can agree on standards and processes for addressing these questions, it's going to make all of our lives easier. We sort of standardizing the agreements, or having basically a set format that we all agree on that are using local contexts, it's going to make things easier in many ways for all of us.
No, I don't need, I just realized I don't need the mic. I just had I'm reflecting and listening to this conversation. I think it's a really interesting question. And I'm reminded of the comments that some of the panelists made yesterday about how Indigenous data sovereignty invites relationship. And, you know, that's sort of central to co-production of knowledge, is this ongoing relationship. And I think my understanding of those local context labels is that they're also about inviting relationships. So, you know, I think one of the key issues around Indigenous data sovereignty is how do we support communities to maintain the relationship with their data, because that's so important in Indigenous data. So, you know, I think, you know, thinking about how all of everything is constantly changing in this domain. And so just going back to, yes, there might be a solution that it looks like we have a solution right now, but it's not the end of the conversation. It's just a way of inviting continued conversation. So anyway, that I was just listening and thinking about yesterday's comments and wanting to kind of bring that into this conversation as well.
I have a second question, but I don't want to take that one.
We had someone else and then we can come back if we have time. Okay. Thanks, John.
Thanks, panelists. You guys are really impressive. I love all of the technical expertise. It's really cool to hear from. My name is Emma. I'm a postdoc and I do community engaged monitoring work. So I'm producing data that then I have to figure out how to manage and also facilitate, like Nora was just saying, like an ongoing and open relationship between the community members and the data that we're collecting. And so I'd really like you guys to sort of comment on the relationship between data stewardship and like specifically the platform Facebook, because that is what connects everybody in the communities that I work in. And it connects people who otherwise would never be accessing specific data, but who absolutely want to see that data and kind of have this idea that it's being collected. So just, you know, free form, however you want to take that on.
I actually love this question because the Facebook relationship has been something that, you know, we realized a long time ago. I think one of the seminal events was when a baby killer whale beached on the north side of St. Paul Island, and we didn't realize it as a monitoring program or the Tribal Environmental Office. They got the report of that beached killer whale from Facebook. So someone in the community had first posted it to Facebook, and that was where the community sentinels found it. So over the years, we have gone kind of both ways. We've pulled information from Facebook and had sentinels enter that data because it was important in what was at that time the Bering Watch database. And then we've also ported observations to Facebook that we think would be of interest to the community. And, so you make a very important point that, that a lot of people use Facebook as a networking tool in Alaska, and you have to be aware of it if you're, conducting a community monitoring program. So we've taken different approaches over the years, and we will have, similar tools where we could port information to Facebook and ideally, the other way if someone posts, but there are issues with, interacting with Facebook. Anna Marie can speak to that, just, trying to set up a user login through Facebook over the last, 3 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, just to elaborate, I mean, more so like if you're thinking also about creating tools so ISNS through an application, there's certain even like information that Facebook and Meta Business requires for even our platform to get registered officially as a quote unquote business. And I have been through many rounds of submitting documents, but since we're a tribal sovereign government, our federally recognized name is Aleut Community of St. Paul Island, but on our legal documents, it's Tribal Government of St. Paul Island, and then it doesn't match the website. And so Facebook is preventing us from actually allowing our app to have a Facebook credential login because of some weird semantics. So that's like it's never something I ever thought I would be submitting like tribal W-9s to Facebook ever. But there's that like layer of even like thinking about the barriers to communities even starting their own program in that sense too. And I'd be curious in learning from Sophie and like navigating some of the Facebook semantics, but I'll kick it back to the panel to speak more on on that specific question, but that's just a little an aside.
I feel like there's a lot of Facebook stuff we can talk about later. But I think, like, honestly, Facebook, I think, was one of the inspirations also behind Siku. Like, the Inuit Hunting Stories of the Day Facebook group is like a really powerful example of how Inuit use technology to share stories with each other. And like, Siku was built just to be a platform where Inuit would own the stories that they shared, you know, and also would be protected from harassment and would not be like vulnerable to like a set of principles on a platform that was built in California that like doesn't really understand or reflect northern context and northern values. But it's also inescapable. Like, it's, yeah, we use Facebook to communicate with not just our users, but like a bit of a broader range, like promoting the challenges that we run, or like information about Siku and that kind of thing. And it's even possible for a user on the platform to decide, I want to make my post shareable to Facebook. But what we've done there to try and protect that data is that it just shows like the photo preview and like the one caption text that's like the basic content of a Siku post. And then if you click on it, it redirects you to Siku. So you have to agree to the terms to be able to see the rest of the post. But yeah, it's an invaluable tool for communication and engagement across, I think, a lot of the circumpolar north. Canada is not excluded from that, Greenland as well. So it's there.
I just wanted to add that one of my jobs, I was the archivist for ICC Alaska, and to do web archiving, which was asked ICC wanted, you cannot archive in archive.org, Facebook. So in terms of like, when you think about preservation after the party's over, it becomes an added challenge that the internet's archive has not yet negotiated or legally resolved. And it goes back and forth. Like, sometimes it works and then something changes in Facebook's system, and then Internet Work isn't able to archive. So just to put that out there, because yeah, it's inescapable. I can show my bias. I mean, people use it and communicate. My family in Southwell uses it, but it certainly has challenges.
Peter, any other thoughts to add?
Yeah, I think this is a more general one, and we could have probably a whole session on the technical aspects of connecting to Facebook and so on. But I think this is an important point raised about the nature of these data systems that we're talking about, and information systems and so on. And I've been talking a lot with funders about this, is historically, I think we've seen this as a technical space where you fund the development of a technical system and you have developers and software being developed and so on. But more and more we see that there are the social technical sort of aspects, is all these other conversations about how we're going to share things from a legal perspective, ethical perspectives, and so on. So for the postdocs in the room and others, I think we need to keep encouraging the people who are funding this work in particular to recognize that the systems are far more than the technology. And Facebook's just a really good example of one that goes deep and broad into understanding well beyond the technical aspects.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Peter, and all the responses from the panel so far. I think we've got time for like one or two more questions. And as I pass the mic back, or as we pass it back, I do want to say in a minute, we'll pivot to like thinking about recommendations and kind of some summary. So folks in the audience can think about also, as we're absorbing all of this technical information, recommendations we can take forward to regarding this in the AOS context. But questions?
Just a quick question on the general, I forgot your name, but I'm curious, who from the community are you engaging with? Or also to our panel members, are there community created board, advisory board that you engage with? At what level are you engaging? And then I guess lessons learned on those different levels of engagement. And then the second question, second part, it's a different topic, is on the impact that we are talking about on the integration. And I guess my question is on what is the success? How do you envision the end success picture of integration for this? You know what I mean? Yeah, so what is that picture for all of you? So sorry.
You want me to answer?
Yeah, I'm sorry, and also the panel members. I'm just curious because this is a practical, actual application.
Yes.
So really curious about.
Well, yeah, I encourage you to reach out. I'll give you my business card later, but I encourage you to reach out to my organization because we do have our own team of community engagement folk that go through, and we have multiple communities, not just in the Arctic, but primarily in coastal British Columbia, where we go through and we go to their communities, we communicate with their leaders and elders, people that have influence in their community, and we come to agreements, basically. I assume, like in terms of local context, that is also a conversation where we will, maybe promote it, or just say it's there, and if they choose to want to use it, we will help them with that.
I'll just answer very quickly the first question. I think we engage with users on an individual level, with communities, community-based projects, sort of our project level, as well as like regional partners. So we have, like on Siku, we have a Siku support messenger button. So we get like people messaging us directly and we can chat with them, or through Facebook Messenger as well, a lot of just direct one-on-one contact. And that includes like a lot of feedback or things that are not working or things that need problem solving. Many of the projects that are run on Siku are run by like, for example, like the regional Nunavut Hunters and Trappers Association or the Nunatsiavut government, or Guardians programs in different communities or across multiple communities. And so then we have a relationship with like that body at that level. And that would be like in direct sort of one-on-one engagement, and then also sort of we try and create more formal spaces for all those partners to meet together so that they can also learn from each other and share what they're doing, how they're using Siku, and meet with one another. Yeah, so it's sort of informal and formal avenues of engagement. And then we also like are in community running workshops and training and going out on the land together to learn how to use Siku and that kind of thing. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So for the example the short statement that I put in, we work with the city of Galena. So the city manager, Shannon Huntington, she also ran everything through the city council. City council has tribal and non-tribal members on it. So the tribe is involved in that conversation. We work with the nonprofit Sustainable Energy Galena, Alaska, SEGA. They are an energy nonprofit, which is super cool. I knew that was a thing. So they like run a biofuel plant, and they also do workforce development around energy, alternative energy. And then in Kotzebue, we worked with the utility, Kotzebue Electric Association, and they have to run everything through their board. Their board has tribal council members on it, so the tribe is involved in that decision. And I think also in Kotzebue, I think that's mainly it, like through KEA. But ASAP has like deep and long-standing relationships with both of those communities that have been developed over the course of ASAP's career, like lifespan, which is 14, 15 years. And ASAP researchers are regularly in communities, staying for weeks at a time, and everybody knows everybody, and we like stay in their boathouses. And so the trust and relationship is there in order to do this stewardship work.
Peter or Bruce, anything else to add in response?
I'll just add that over the years, because of the nature of the work I've been involved in, it's not one specific platform. It's been many projects, both in the current organization I'm with and when I was with Aloka. But in all cases, I think we would tend to have either a community organization, if it was a very local application system that they're developing, usually a HTA or Hunter Trapper Association, or a group. We work a lot, for example, with Etok in Clyde River, where they've formed a community organization that oversees research in cultural heritage work, or Kitikmeot Heritage Society. We work with them. Also worked with regional organizations, so organizations that look at licensing like Nunavut Research Institute, or a new one in Nunavik, Canada, which is called Atunuvik. So that brings together, I think, 15 different regional organizations and comes up with sort of a governance model for looking at research in the region. And then up to, you know, organizations like ICC and ITK and so on. So I think it's just really different depending on the application or the context. But in very small number of cases, we've had like an individual research approach and say, we would like to do this. And our response there is always, who are you working with in the community with these organizations? And before we have any conversations, let's connect with those groups. Otherwise, we're not really wanting to move forward on representing that information and knowledge.
Real quick, just to leave time for the recommendations, but it's been a very interesting process over the years trying to evolve this structure, because I mean, we started out, you know, within the tribal government of St. Paul Island, but a lot of people on, you know, here are familiar with it. In Alaska, you have multiple entities. You'll have the tribal government, the municipal government, and then the tribal or the native corporation. And then now we have fisheries associations in the mix, which are all kind of entities within the community that have some level of governance or influence. So we've basically evolved. We wanted a simple structure that, you know, would allow us to implement data sovereignty protections as well as allow networking. So we've sort of created a structure that the community, it is most likely represented by a tribal council, but the community is the bottom layer, and members of the community are within, you know, a community grouping, and then communities can come together to work with organizations that want to do a data collection program. So that would kind of be the umbrella organization that's uniting a group of communities. And then within that data collection program, which can have its own data access protections, you then have data forms that they can use. And, you know, so I guess my main point is that it's been a very interesting process to try and figure out how to structure that in a community monitoring or community-driven monitoring program, which is what we aspire to being. So, I mean, it's a very good question, and you know, we've taken a stab at it. We'll see how it works. We may have to adapt the structure as we go forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce, and thanks for the panelist's response too. I think in the sake of time, I'm curious to hear from the room and if there's any reflections. You know, we talked about interoperability and like how to improve that, the need for aggregation and cross-sharing across our platforms. So I guess, are there anything from the audience or groups or even the panelists who come into mind about maybe some recommendations to carry forward, like mechanisms and protocols or policies that can support implementing data sovereignty principles from a technical standpoint? Big question, but are there current thoughts bubbling up? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just thinking along the lines of that there was a point earlier on in this conversation where we were discussing we don't really have the trusted group of members capable of implementing the interoperability aspect of it. We might have the ontologies down, but there's still that gap of technical ability, I guess, to actually get these things up and running sometimes. Like there are a few examples out there of really promising ontologies that, well, personally, I've been waiting on becoming operational for 3 years now. So I guess one way forward would be to help facilitate those connections to capable people to help these groups to actuate their interoperability. And I mean, that could also be something as simple as appropriate funding. So trying to reach out to, you know, funders and potential like governmental bodies to say, hey, this is important. We need this now, and it's not going to happen without the proper funding
Mhm.
and connections.
If I can add to that, just a quick point, because I think that's very valuable. I think one recommendation I would make is that we look at more collaborative proposals where, if 4 networks are coming together to, write a proposal to a funder, be that a tech foundation or a government agency, I think that can produce very powerful grant proposals. And if we get things funded together, we're not only dealing with what can often, the competitive grant making process, pits us against each other in many ways right now. And if we work together to write these proposals, then, that's going to build our relationships and also, with the funders. So that might result in more consistent long-term funding. So that would be, the core recommendation there is more collaborative proposals to get the kind of things that we're talking about today done together.
I might just quickly add there too, in terms of appropriate funding, is not thinking about information systems as a 2-year project that ends at the end of 2 years. These are living systems, so we have to fund them that way. Otherwise, we end up with these great results that are wonderful for 6 months and then they fade away and they're gone into history.
Mhm. Thank you guys for that point. I'm seeing some nods from the panels here, but data management too is long and living and takes a lot. So I know we had one recommendation in the back corner too. And then over here. Okay, over there. Mhm. And go back.
Hi, this isn't necessarily a recommendation, just a thought. First off, thanks to the panel and the organizers and everybody here. This is really interesting. And second, hi Bruce, this is Jeremy Davies from Ocean Conservancy. Good to see you. Wish I could buy you a drink here.
Hey, Jeremy. Thank you.
My, I guess, question that could be a recommendation is, are any of the platforms that you all have talked about something that could be built out or shared and used as a common platform? And like Siku, I'm guessing is built, from the ground up. I don't know what, Indigenous Sentinels Network is using, or their, your working groups, their Fairbanks or anyone else. But like I have worked with several tribes in Alaska and continue to in my work with Ocean Conservancy, and have worked with groups like in Nunatsu with the other oceans, or Oceans North, not Oceans Network. And we always went back to using ArcGIS Online and Survey 123, which I know has a lot of problems, and I have serious concerns about who owns the data and privacy. But it's such an easy platform to work with for them. And I'm not proposing that should be the universal one. I'm thinking maybe one of these other platforms could be used, by this group to expand and share with others to use the same both data collection tool and platform for sharing data in a way that's more universal than having to pay into ArcGIS Online or use Open Data Kit, which only works on Android, which is why we ended up rejecting it every time we would use, try to look for a good way to collect data in the field. So that's it.
That's a big point in question. I think we should maybe have some quick responses and then we'll have one last.
Thank you guys for hanging on.
Yeah, I just want to yes and that. I think we've talked about data interoperability. I think we should think about systems interoperability so that we can respect the agreements and the different sort of niches in terms of maybe regional specificity or type of observation, but have interoperability between the systems so someone can go and log
What kind of observations people are putting on your platform?
sea ice observation, and then maybe they're with their family and they want to talk about this baby killer whale that showed up. So I would add yes and the systems.
Maybe just quickly, I think like all of these networks, we talk to each other and we I think really invested in figuring out like where do these platforms best suit the needs of communities, I think, right? Like, because they are developed to like in response to specific tasks or whatever. And so I think also even like the better we understand each other's platforms, the better we'd be able to be like, actually, you know, it would be perfect.
Yeah.
Should like set this up on ISN. Or I don't know, like I think I don't know if we need like a monolith, but we also don't want to have, okay, you have to open this app for this app for this app for this. That's too many.
I think some of them are aspiring to be platforms that can be used across, you know, multiple regions. And then, I don't know, Peter, I think that maybe, do you want to weigh in here a little bit too? Just because I think Iloka and GCRC have a slightly different model. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, just quickly.
Yeah, I think we've taken the approach of developing an open source framework that anybody can use and that conceivably could be used across, you know, a community. Ours is more focused on sort of community atlases, and that includes heritage and all kinds of other things, not as much the observing, although we do some of that with like inReach GPS units and that. But I think the comment made from the audience is sort of where we may be heading as a community. The diversity of all these different applications is a great thing though, because it means if we were to get together and say, well, can we work together on something that we could share? We have a lot of experience now that would inform what that might look like, the best approach, because there is a lot to figure out.
Just real fast to add, I think ISN aspires in some ways to, you know, being a tool, a platform that could be, you know, flexibly used by, you know, a very diverse group of users. But at the same time, I mean, SIKU is really cool and doing fantastic work. So I think what Sophie quickly said, you know, yes, maybe ISN could be useful to quickly implement a data collection form for a SIKU project, but that data should go back to SIKU and live there. And that's where I mentioned earlier, you know, there's both, you could output that data with our current reporting tool, but that's a hassle. I mean, if we get together and build application programming interfaces that let the technology do that, then that data automatically goes back to SIKU or wherever it's going. So, you know, you can, I agree with Peter and Sophie, the diversity that we have is too precious to lose. It's really figuring out how we work together and what are the interoperability issues that we need to cross. Thanks for the question, Jeremy.
No, I think it's a great question, and all the comments are quite exciting, actually. I just wanted to add another concept, which is like a data mesh infrastructure. So basically we have distributed, decentralized control of data, but it can talk to each other. And I think that's kind of what people are describing.
Thank you, Vanessa. Genuinely, just thought I had to speak to you, but that was a good reminder because I had looked into that, and that's a good point. Okay, Ross, recommendation.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Siwon Jung, and I'm with Korea Polar Research Institute. I would like firstly to express my gratitude to the panelists, which provide a great ground for the conversation. And I must confess that from non-optic observer perspective, sharing data issue has been, somewhat, how can I say, passed into the, the Korea programs optic partner institutions such as, University of Alaska Fairbanks and Polar Knowledge Canada. When it comes to planning and planning, prior consultation, after consultation, and sharing data, which is gained after the field work, is beautifully arranged by the international partners. So that has made us to less concentrated upon the importance of the data sharing issue, but still, I would like to emphasize that we are on a learning process, and that we have a willingness to have a very good grasp upon with its issue. So I wanted to encourage myself to for the record leave one question and one recommendation. Question is to the panelists is, have you ever worked with the third party non-active entities in regards to what you were doing in terms of the data sharing and engaging with the knowledge and the right holders? Because I'm actually seeking best practice / lessons learned when we are thinking further regarding this data sharing with our knowledge holders. And one recommendation would be that maybe we could be leave a, how can I say, leave a direction to the non-active players for this working group as well, to reaching out and encouraging them to focus more upon with the data sharing, because at the end of the day, you will have a great room of potential for their contribution when we thinking about the international joint effort in sciences. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that question and that recommendation. Any responses?
I think on SIKU, the data is in the hands of the users and the projects, and so some of the, I'm not aware of any projects that are that have data stewarded to them on SIKU that work with non-Arctic partners.
Anyone, Bruce or Peter, are you aware of any collaboration with non-Arctic partners around this question of sort of data sharing and Indigenous data that you can share?
Bruce, if you can't think of one of the initial conversation.
Well, yeah, go ahead. I can add to it if needed.
And it's not like a current collaboration, but I think it speaks to the point of that there's a lot of groups that are still struggling with this even outside of the Arctic that I think could be an interesting, they could help inform our work, but then also it could trickle down to other regions. The one I'm thinking of, Bruce, is Georgia Tech researchers in the Great Lake region were looking at doing wild rice monitoring and had reached out to ISN for that potential applicability of the tool in that region. So we have been approached. I think capacity wise, we hadn't circled back. We did have an initial meeting and there was interest. But I think they were also still in their planning stage. And so we were kind of in this waiting period and maybe still are, but that's the first one that was a non-Arctic, but also looking at wild rice monitoring in the Great Lakes region and harvesting of that and collecting data for research purposes. So.
Bruce, did you want to go ahead and add?
Yeah, no, that's a good example. I think we have been having conversations. We have connections with the Maori in New Zealand through our tribal council, Marissa Merkulieff, and had a conversation. They actually came to Majorca, Marissa and her friends from New Zealand. And I think there will be options for non-Arctic data collection that will happen relatively quickly. We've deferred them all until we came out with the new platform. So all the conversations are kind of in waiting, but I expect to work in the lower 48 and perhaps in New Zealand and here in Majorca.
We're actively working on a project with, First Nation government, but who also has a number of community projects in discussing a broader national biodiversity observing network. We call it CANBON for Canadian Biodiversity Observing Network, and then linking that to the international, what's called GeoBon. So there's a lot of discussion about how do you, on the one hand, allow the Arctic communities to do what they need to do and focus on what they need to focus on, but be able to connect to this national effort and ultimately international effort. And often it comes down to these same questions. So what's the sovereignty questions, but also the interoperability questions and things like that.
Great. Well, thanks so much again to our panel and to everybody in the room for your great questions and discussion. Another round of applause for the panel. And we'll continue the conversation into subsequent sessions. There's 2 more sessions that this working group is leading. So we look forward to more conversation.
Thank you all for your attention, please. Thank you.